The scorching heat of Virginia burned against Sarah's skin. Peter, 8, and Lucy, 6, walked beside her. Sweat ran down the thin woman's face, mixing with quiet tears she tried to hide from the children. In her Tree Maple Hollow farm, County Route 17, Hillstone Township, it was the address of her missing brother, Thomas Jenkins, who had left 15 years. The official declaration of his disappearance had arrived together with the eviction notice from the tiny room she rented in Riverside. After 12 years at a sewing factory, Sarah had been laid off. That morning, she had counted the few coins inside an old milk tin for the third time. Could not, the dismissal letter still burned against her chest, tucked inside her bra beside the children's birth certificates. Company they split the night before had been especially hard. Peter and Lucy, still too young to grasp the truth, had asked if they were going to visit the countryside, like when they used to see their cousin back in Jackson County. "Mom, is it still far?" Peter asked, his voice faint. "Not much further, honey," she replied, trying to sound confident, hiding the hand that clutched the last few coins in the pocket of her patched dress. Sarah's worn-out shoes sank into the red dust. The children walked barefoot to save the only pair they owned. She stopped for a moment, offering the last sip of water from the metal flask for them to share. Her throat burned with thirst, but she swallowed dry. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since the morning before, saving what little they had for the kids. The sun still punished her back, relentless. Sarah lifted her face toward the mercilessly blue sky, not a single cloud in sight. A silent prayer escaped her cracked lips. "Dear God, please don't let my children go hungry again. Give me strength." Rounding a bend in the road, they finally saw it, Maple Hollow Farm, a patch of parched land fenced with loose wire. A small mud brick house with a partially collapsed roof. Beside it, a dry well and a few cactus plants still clinging to life under the heat. The wooden gate hung from a single rusted hinge, creaking as the hot wind stirred the dust. Sarah felt her heart tighten. In the city, even misery had a touch of dignity, a roof, no matter how small, running water, even if irregular, and sometimes the kindness of a stranger. Here there was only silence. They were alone, facing the unforgiving land that demanded blood and sweat for every drop it gave. "Is this where we're gonna live, Mom?" Lucy asked softly, her eyes fixed on the crumbling house. Sarah's stomach twisted. That ruined place was all that remained, her last hope. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, forcing a smile. "It'll be fine soon. You'll see." Up close the house looked even worse. The clay walls were cracked, letting the wind pass freely through them. Part of the roof had caved in over what must have been the kitchen, exposing wooden beams, twisted and dry from years of sun. Dark stains on the outer wall hinted that fire had once touched the place. Inside, the air was suffocating. The dirt floor stirred clouds of dust with every step. The remaining furniture, a crooked table, 2 old benches, and a bed frame without a mattress, looked as though time itself had devoured them. Cobwebs hung in every corner, and the smell of mold mixed with dry earth. In the corner, a small stone stove improvised for firewood was the only thing resembling a kitchen. Peter, ever practical, began examining the walls, touching the ceiling beams where he could reach. "We can fix it, Mom," he said, trying to sound hopeful. "That straw over there could cover the hole in the roof." Sarah smiled, her chest aching at the sight of her son's forced maturity. At 8 years old, he already thought like a man, carrying burdens no child should bear. Lucy squealed from the other corner, where a small toad jumped, startled by their presence. "Look, Mom, there's a creature in here." "Yes, honey," Sarah replied gently. "We'll have to clean everything up." Sarah wiped the sweat from her face. "Let's start by fixing a small corner where we can sleep tonight," she said softly. "Tomorrow we'll deal with the rest." With a makeshift broom, a bundle of dry straw tied to a branch, they swept one corner of the room. Sarah spread their only sheet over the packed dirt floor. That would be their bed for the night, for all 3 of them. As they worked, she tried not to think about what lay ahead, the long, stifling night, the insects, and the hunger gnawing at their stomachs. By late afternoon, they stepped outside to explore the land. In the yard, they found a few prickly pears, and a small wild plum tree with scattered fruit. Sarah gathered what she could, rinsed it with the last drops of water from the flask, and shared it between the children. The sour taste made Lucy wince, but she ate without complaint, aware, even at her young age, that there was no other choice. Night fell quickly, bringing an unexpected chill that contrasted with the day's heat. With no electricity, darkness swallowed the house, broken only by the faint silver glow of the moon slipping through cracks in the roof. In one corner, Sarah found an old kerosene lamp, but without fuel. It was just another useless relic. That night, lying on her dress spread over the floor, her children curled tightly against her body, Sarah stared at the uneven ceiling. Her stomach rumbled, but she forced herself to ignore it. Peter had asked for food 3 times before falling asleep, and all she could offer was a promise she barely believed herself. Tomorrow will be better. Lucy drifted off quickly, worn out from the long walk, but Peter stayed awake, his eyes glowing in the dark. "Mom, Dad won't find us here, will he?" he whispered. The question caught Sarah off guard. It had been years since her ex-husband had vanished, back when Lucy was only 6 months old. A violent man who drank too much and worked too little. He had disappeared after a vicious fight, taking what little money they had left in the house. "No, sweetheart," she whispered, stroking his hair. "He won't find us here. Try to rest. We have a lot to do tomorrow." But as Peter finally closed his eyes, Sarah's thoughts spiraled. What if this land gave them nothing? How would she feed her children? The worry ate at her like a worm, burrowing through her tired mind. All she had left in this world were her children, and a dry, unforgiving piece of land she wasn't even sure could sustain life. As the moonlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, Sarah noticed something strange. There were markings, symbols drawn in charcoal across the clay walls, numbers, arrows, and letters that made no immediate sense. For a moment, she wondered if her brother had lost his mind in the isolation of this forgotten place. She rose carefully, trying not to wake the children, and moved closer to the wall. In the dim light, she could make out sequences of numbers, rough drawings that seemed to point to specific spots, and scattered words, water, supplies, documents. In one corner, a more elaborate sketch appeared. It looked like a map of the property, with several X's marking hidden points. A shiver ran down her spine, despite the heat still radiating from the walls. What had Thomas been doing out here? Why these secret markings? Could he have actually found gold, like he once wrote in that last letter so many years ago? The first rays of morning pierced through the roof's gaps, waking her. Her body ached from the hard floor. Her mouth was dry. The children still slept, curled up in uncomfortable positions. Sarah rose quietly. Every minute they slept was one more minute free from hunger. Outside, the sun was already scorching the ground. The heat would soon become unbearable. She looked around the property under daylight. An uneven piece of land, maybe 2 acres, surrounded by sagging barbed wire, rusted and broken in many places. Beyond it stretched the neighboring plots, equally dry, each with a house as fragile as hers. Would you live in a crumbling house just to give your children a roof? What would you do if you found strange markings on the walls, clues left behind by someone who vanished? Comment below what you would do in Sarah's place. And don't miss the next chapter in her search for the truth about her missing brother. Subscribe to Family Heirlooms, turn on notifications, and share this story of courage and survival. The day broke with the distant crow of a rooster. Sarah awoke with sore muscles and eyes burning from dust. The children were still asleep, exhausted from the long journey. She stepped outside and examined the land. The yard was overgrown with tall, thorny weeds. The fence had several gaps, and at the far end stood a small wooden shed, barely standing. Inside, the air smelled of soil and old metal. Rusty tools, a broken hoe, a shovel, and a pickaxe, leaned against the wall. Light leaked through the cracks in the rotten wood, illuminating the floating dust. When she lifted one of the tools, Sarah noticed something odd. Despite their age, they were in good condition, worn, yes, but used recently. The pickaxe handle was smooth from constant use, and the shovel bore marks of deep digging. far more than a farmer would ever need. Behind a stack of old boards in a dark corner, she spotted something, a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and dry with age. Inside, page after page of tightly written notes in a handwriting she instantly recognized, Thomas's. Most entries were dated, followed by numbers and cryptic remarks. Third dig unsuccessful. Information seems right, but wrong location. Neighbor asked about night noises. Must be more careful. Sarah flipped through the journal, her confusion growing. Her brother seemed obsessed with something, mentioning documents, evidence, recordings. One entry stood out. Colonel D returned to the area. Must move the material to hideout B. Don't trust the men he brought. The well is his biggest concern. Without water, they won't last a week. Sarah's eyes darted toward the dry well outside. She grabbed the rope and pulled. The bucket rose empty, filled only with dirt. "Mom!" Peter's voice broke the silence. "I'm hungry." He stood in the doorway, his hair a tangled mess, his hollow eyes revealing days of hunger. Behind him, Lucy rubbed her swollen eyes, her small belly protruding against the faded fabric of her dress, not from fullness, but from malnutrition. Sarah's heart clenched. She quickly hid the notebook among her clothes and turned to her children. "I'll find something for us to eat," she said. Outside, she searched the property for anything edible. She found a few cactus pads, a handful of small green plums, and a patch of wild cucumbers covered in thorns. Using her old knife, she cut what she could, cooking a makeshift meal in a rusty tin she'd found. As she stirred the food, Peter wandered over to the wall, tracing one of the charcoal markings with his finger. "What's this, Mom?" he asked curiously. "I don't know, son," she replied quietly. "Your Uncle Thomas drew it." Peter followed the lines with fascination. "It looks like a map," he said, his eyes wide, his finger outlining the symbols that connected the numbers. Sarah stepped closer, her heart pounding as she studied the strange drawings under the morning light. The markings formed lines pointing in different directions, with numbers that could have been distances or coordinates. In the center, a circle with a cross, and the word root scribbled in shaky letters. "It's like a treasure, Mom," Peter exclaimed, his eyes glowing with an excitement she hadn't seen in weeks. "We could look for it." "It's not a game, Peter," Sarah replied, trying to sound firm, though it was hard not to smile at his hope. "Your uncle was probably marking places to plant, or to dig for wells." Lucy, who had been quiet, stepped forward holding something in her hand. "Look what I found." "Mum," it was a small wooden cross, hand-carved, with the initials TJS, Thomas Jenkins Sr., etched at the base. The girl had found it behind the door, half buried in dust and cobwebs. Sarah took the cross carefully, her heart tightening. It was the kind of cross country folk used to mark meaningful spots, springs, graves, places of promise. But her brother had never been a religious man. Why would he have made this? After feeding the children with what little food she could prepare, Sarah grabbed the rusty shovel and began digging near the house. Searching for the old well the county record said once existed there, the sun burned her back. Her hands, used to thread and fabric, were soon raw and bleeding. Peter insisted on helping, swinging the small hoe with a determination that broke her heart. Lucy sat under the thin shade of a thorn bush, playing with colored pebbles she'd found. Every few minutes she looked up and asked, "Did you find water yet, Mom?" Sweat poured down Sarah's face, soaking the front of her blouse. Her thirst was unbearable now. The last drops of water had gone to the children hours earlier. Her arms trembled with exhaustion, but she kept digging, driven by sheer desperation. Then Peter shouted, "Mom, look!" A large beetle crawled out of the freshly turned soil. "They say when those beetles show up, water isn't far," Peter said, eyes wide with hope. Sarah wasn't sure if that was true, but she clung to the thought as if it were a promise. She dug harder, her shovel striking the dry earth again and again. After half an hour of effort, the soil began to darken, turning slightly damp. "Water, Mom!" Peter shouted, jumping with excitement. It wasn't exactly a well, but a thin underground stream. Digging a little deeper, they managed to form a small pool of muddy water. It wasn't clean, But once it settled, it would be enough to quench their thirst. Hours later, drained and trembling, Sarah sat under the weak shade of an old tree. Then something clicked in her mind. Those numbers on the wall. They might represent steps. She stood, positioned herself beneath the painted circle and cross inside the house, and began counting. 27 steps later, she reached a dead tree. Nothing visible. But when she struck the ground with her shovel, it sounded hollow. With the last of her strength, she started digging. About a foot deep, the shovel hit something solid, wood, not stone, a dark wooden lid, sealed with a rusted padlock. For a moment she forgot hunger, thirst, exhaustion, her pulse racing with adrenaline. She widened the hole, brushing away dirt until she could see it clearly. It was carefully built, hardwood coated with pitch to resist moisture, thick metal hinges, a heavy lock still intact despite the rust. Her heart pounded. What had her brother hidden down there? Peter crept closer, eyes wide with wonder. "It's a treasure, Mom?" "I told you it was a treasure map." "We don't know that, Peter," Sarah said, trying to calm him, but even her own voice trembled with excitement. Maybe it was just a place where Thomas had kept seeds or tools. But deep down she knew, no one hides tools 30 centimeters underground behind a lock that size. The sun was already setting. Sarah decided to leave it for the morning when she'd have better tools. Before heading back, she carefully covered the hole with dirt and dry leaves. This discovery was far too important to risk anyone else finding it. As night fell, she sat staring at the buried lid while her children slept hungry inside. She had promised them tomorrow would be better. Grabbing the old pickaxe she'd found in the shed, she struck the padlock again and again until it finally gave way. The lid was heavy, but she managed to lift it just enough to peer inside. A wave of damp air rose to meet her, the smell of wet earth. Using a stick wrapped with a kerosene-soaked cloth, she made a small torch and lowered it carefully. Below, the flickering light reflected off water, clear. "Cool, alive, thank God," she whispered. Tears streaming down her sunburned face. The hole was deeper than Sarah expected, nearly 10 feet down to the surface of the water. The walls had been carefully reinforced with adobe bricks, a meticulous job that must have taken weeks. A rough ladder made of wood and rope descended to a small ledge just above the waterline. Thomas hadn't just built a cistern, he had created an underground shelter. Sarah let out a quiet gasp of admiration at her brother's ingenuity. With a hidden reservoir like this, protected from sight and heat, he could have survived even the harshest droughts, using an old bucket she'd found in the shed, tied to a piece of rope. She drew up enough water to fill her canteen and an old tin can that would serve as a larger container. The first sip of cool, fresh water felt like a miracle sliding down her dry throat. Carefully, she descended a few steps of the ladder, testing its strength. The wood creaked, but held her weight. When she reached the small ledge, her flickering torch revealed something she hadn't expected. Shelves carved directly into the earthen wall, covered with plastic sheets protecting what lay beneath. Under the coverings, she discovered sealed tins filled with flour, beans, molasses, and other long-lasting food. They'd been there for years, but were so well preserved that many were still usable. Her brother had built a hidden storeroom, a survival chamber designed for desperate times. But what caught her attention most was a metal box in the far corner of the chamber. Unlike the food containers, this one had a complex lock, newer, sturdier, almost out of place. Sarah decided to take it up to the surface, along with some of the food she'd found, back inside the house. With the children still asleep, she set a tin over a small fire made of dry branches. The scent of coffee, found among her brother's supplies, quickly filled the air. For the first decent meal in days, she prepared a porridge of flour and brown sugar. The sound and smell of food woke Peter and Lucy, who appeared at the doorway, eyes wide. "Mom, is that food?" Peter asked in disbelief. "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah smiled softly. "Your Uncle Thomas left us plenty." As the children devoured their meal with heartbreaking hunger, Sarah examined the metal box. It was made of steel, heavy, and the lock resisted every attempt she made to open it. Something rattled inside the box when she shook it. a dry, clinking sound of metal against metal. The cistern, she realized, was only the beginning. The next morning, following more of the markings on the walls, Sarah uncovered a small cache of better tools buried near the old shed, and, more importantly, a tin can buried beneath the shed's dirt floor, filled with bean, corn, and pumpkin seeds, perfectly preserved inside an old kerosene container. Her brother had left supplies hidden all across the property. But why? Why not just keep them inside the house? The question haunted her as she worked to improve their living conditions. Using the recovered tools, Sarah patched the roof enough to keep the rain out, cleared the weeds and thorns around the house to ward off snakes and insects. Peter helped with a renewed sense of purpose, especially when they followed the treasure map, as he called the wall markings. Each new discovery revealed a little more about the man her brother had become. In one hiding spot, near the back fence, they found neatly folded men's clothes, protected inside plastic bags. In another, near an old oak tree, they unearthed a small box containing fishing lines, hooks, and survival tools. It was clear now, Thomas hadn't just been living here. He had been preparing for something. The hidden caches, the careful preservation of supplies, the cryptic notes in his journal, all pointed to a man who feared being hunted. 3 days after their arrival, with the house now barely livable and the pantry stocked with what they'd found, Sarah finally had a quiet moment to sit down with the journal again. The children slept, their bellies full for the first time in weeks. By the light of a makeshift oil lamp, she turned the yellowed pages carefully. At first, the notes were simple. Routine records of the farm, the construction of the cistern, planting seasons. But about a year after his arrival, the tone changed drastically. March 1992. I met the man that R mentioned in Hillstone, the journal read. He confirmed the existence of the documents. Says they're hidden in an old military outpost near the state line. I must be extremely careful. People have disappeared for far less. A few pages later, another entry, even more disturbing. Finch 7/92. I made contact with J. He worked as a driver for Colonel D for 3 years. Confirms everything we suspected. The operation was far bigger than anyone ever reported. Dozens of farmers were executed. Not just rebels, but entire families. Jay gave me photographs and reports he saved from the destruction of the archives. I'll hide everything until I have the full set of evidence. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. She remembered faintly the old stories whispered when she was a teenager. Tales of soldiers, rebels, and people who vanished during the dark years of dictatorship. Her brother hadn't just been surviving. He'd been investigating something tied to that buried past. As she planted bean seeds in a small patch of soil near the cistern, a figure appeared on the dirt road, an elderly man, walking slowly under the heavy sun. You must be Thomas's sister, he said, tipping his worn straw hat. Name's Joe Little. I live on the next property over. He was stooped from age and years of labor, his skin darkened and creased by the sun, but his eyes were sharp and alert, watching Sarah with quiet intensity. Did you know my brother? She asked cautiously. Sure did. Kept to himself, always digging holes at night. Folks thought he was crazy, but I knew better. He had his reasons. The old man glanced around, checking that no one was nearby. You know why he came out here, don't you? He asked in a low voice. He came from mining, Sarah replied. That's what he said in his last letter. Joe let out a short, humorless laugh. Mining was just the start. He found something he shouldn't have, something from the military years. A chill ran down Sarah's spine, despite the heat pressing on her shoulders. What do you mean? She asked. 15, maybe 16 years back, Joe began. Your brother worked on a big government project, a dam construction out by the San Francisco River. They found an old archive, Joe continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Documents and other things that someone hid back during the dictatorship. Most of the workers didn't care, but your brother, he could read, and he understood what it meant. After that discovery, Thomas had bought this piece of land and vanished from the world. The old man leaned on his wooden cane, stepping closer. Your brother helped me once, he said quietly. My grandson was sick. No medicine left in town. Thomas came by with enough money to get what the boy needed. I never asked where it came from, but once he told me he'd found gold. Not in veins of earth, but in bars, hidden with important papers. Joe's eyes darted around again, scanning the horizon. There are powerful people still looking for what he hid. A retired colonel lives in the big city now. Every time he shows up here, he brings armed men. You should be careful. Do you think... Sarah hesitated, her voice trembling. Do you think they did something to my brother? Joe sighed, shoulders slumping. When you dig up buried secrets, he said, you sometimes end up buried with them. He straightened, ready to leave. My house is just past the bend near the dry creek. If you ever need help, call for me. But be careful who you talk to. Some folks around here sell information to the colonel for a handful of coins. Before Sarah could ask more, the old man tipped his hat and walked away, leaving her with more questions than answers. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Sarah examined the walls again, under the flicker of her lamp. The markings formed a pattern more complex than she had realized, not just a guide to hidden supplies, but a map with different symbols marking specific points. Near the center of one wall, nearly invisible beneath soot, she found a faint series of numbers, like coordinates, and below them a line of small handwriting. Where the river meets the stone of sacrifice, 15 steps north from the broken cross. The words chilled her. There was no running river nearby, only the dry bed of a stream that flowed during rare storms. And what was the stone of sacrifice? As for the broken cross, perhaps a grave, or some forgotten shrine like those scattered across the countryside. Sarah realized that to uncover the mystery her brother left behind, she would need to learn more about the land itself. The markings on the walls were only one piece of the puzzle. The rest of the puzzle seemed scattered across the dry landscape around her. Later that night, under the weak glow of the oil lamp, Sarah tried again to open the metal box she had found in the cistern. After several failed attempts, she remembered the small wooden cross Lucy had discovered. Examining it closely, she realized the base could be twisted off. Inside was a tiny hidden key. Her hands trembled as she slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. A gentle click echoed through the silent room. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic and waxed cloth, were several objects. A bundle of letters tied. With string, black and white photographs, an old cassette recorder and a few tapes. At the bottom lay something that made her heart skip, a small leather pouch containing 6 gold bars, each about the length of a finger, stamped with military markings. Have you ever found something mysterious left behind by a missing relative? What would you do if you discovered your brother had hidden documents connected to the military regime? Tell us what would go through your mind in that moment. The first rays of dawn were breaking when Sarah heard the distant sound of an engine. She froze, peering through a crack in the broken window. A black pickup truck, coated in dust, stopped near the fence. 3 men stepped out, one older, with grey hair, wearing a Panama hat and dark sunglasses. The other 2 looked like bodyguards. The red dust still floated in the air as the engine kept running, as if they were ready to leave at any moment. The man in the hat adjusted his belt, and Sarah caught a glimpse of what looked like the holster of a gun, hidden beneath his light jacket despite the heat. Sensing danger, she turned to her children. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "Don't make a sound." She guided them under the broken table. "Don't come out until I say so." Moving fast, she hid the metal box and the journal beneath a loose floorboard she had found earlier. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as heavy footsteps approached the door. The knocks were firm, deliberate. Sarah took a deep breath and opened it, trying to appear calm, though her hands were shaking. "Good morning," said the grey-haired man, flashing a polite smile that never reached his eyes. "I'm Colonel Julian Danner. You must be Sarah Jenkins, Thomas's sister." He was a tall man, his posture straight and commanding despite the grey in his hair. He looked to be in his 60s, but carried himself with the rigid discipline of a soldier. His tanned face bore faint scars near the jawline, and his eyes, cold and calculating, examined Sarah as though she were a commodity to be appraised. Her heart raced. He was exactly the man Joe Little had warned her about. "Yes, that's me," she replied. "How can I help you?" "I heard you inherited this property," he said calmly. "I'm here to make an offer, $15,000 for the land, cash." Sarah hesitated. It was more money than she had ever imagined holding in her hands, enough to start over, to give her children a better life. For a fleeting moment she pictured it, renting a small house in town, buying new clothes for the kids, maybe even a sewing machine to work on her own again. "That's very kind of you," she finally said. "But we just arrived. I'm not planning to sell." The colonel's smile vanished, peeled away like a mask revealing the chill beneath. "You don't understand," he said coldly. "This land is worthless. Dry soil, collapsing house. I'm being generous." His eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on the patches of fresh clay where Sarah had tried to cover the wall markings. "Even so," she answered, steadying her voice, "I intend to stay." His gaze hardened. He stepped closer, invading her space. "Your brother and I had an agreement. He owed me something important. If you choose to stay, you'll inherit his problems too." The threat hung heavy in the air. Sarah thought of the children hiding beneath the broken table, of everything she'd uncovered, of her brother's mysterious fate. Her legs trembled, but she met his stare. "I don't know anything about an agreement, Colonel. This land was my brother's, and now it's mine, by right." The colonel turned toward the door, but before leaving he said, "I'll give you a few days to think it over. I'll be back in 3 days for your answer. I suggest you choose wisely." He motioned to his men, who threw her menacing looks before following him to the truck. As the vehicle disappeared down the dusty road, Sarah's knees weakened. There was no doubt in her mind. That visit was about whatever her brother had hidden. Peter and Lucy crept out from their hiding place. The boy clung to her waist, his eyes wide and fearful. "Who was that man, Mom?" "Someone who wants to buy our land, sweetheart," she whispered, brushing his hair. "But don't worry, we're not leaving." Lucy, always more sensitive, began to cry softly. "He's bad, Mom," she said. "I saw it in his eyes." Sarah knelt to wipe the tears from her daughter's face. "No one's going to hurt us, my love. I promise." But even as she said the words, she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. The colonel didn't seem like the kind of man who took no for an answer, especially from a woman alone, with 2 small children and no protection. That afternoon, despite the brutal heat, Sarah returned to study the markings on the walls. The phrase, "where the river meets the stone of sacrifice," had to point to a specific place. If the colonel was willing to pay such a large sum for the land, whatever her brother had hidden here must have been incredibly valuable. Or dangerous. It was Peter who gave her the clue. "Mom, Mr. Joe said there's a dry waterfall not far from here. The natives used to do rituals there a long time ago." Sarah turned to him, surprised. "He told you that?" "Yeah," Peter nodded. "Yesterday when you were fixing the roof. He showed me a path behind the house, said if we follow the trail of crooked palm trees, we'll get there. A place of ancient rituals, a stone of sacrifice." It could be exactly what her brother's notes referred to. Sarah decided to investigate. She left the children in the care of Anna, a quiet but kind-hearted woman who lived half a mile away, and set out with only a water bottle and her pickaxe. The trail was faint, almost invisible to untrained eyes, marked only by small piles of stones that served as old trail markers. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the brittle vegetation. Cicadas screamed endlessly, and in the distance a hawk circled, waiting patiently for prey. After nearly an hour of walking beneath the searing sun, Sarah reached the dry riverbed, where massive stone formations rose from the cracked earth. One in particular stood out, a flat rock etched with ancient carvings, stylized human figures, animals, and concentric circles, the stone of sacrifice. The place carried an almost supernatural air. Though dry for years, the riverbed seemed to retain the memory of flowing water. Resilient plants grew between the stones, and the silence there was deeper than anywhere else. Following the wall's inscription, Sarah counted 15 steps north from a broken stone cross near the edge of the dry channel. The area looked untouched for decades, covered in dust, thorns, and scattered stones. The cross itself appeared natural, carved by erosion into the shape of a weathered cross, its top half shattered by time and storms. With her pickaxe, Sarah began to dig. The soil was hard, resisting every strike, but she persisted, her calloused hands reopening old wounds. With each swing, she imagined her brother doing the same years ago, burying something so important that he built an entire web of clues to protect it. About 16 inches down, the pickaxe struck something solid. The metallic clang echoed through the dry riverbed. As Sarah brushed away more dirt, she uncovered a metal box about the size of a shoebox, sealed with a small padlock. The edges were rusted, but the lock itself looked surprisingly intact, coated with wax, likely by her brother's own hand. She glanced around to make sure she was alone, then raised the pickaxe. The lock snapped open with a sharp crack that echoed unnaturally loud, as if the very earth were holding its breath. Inside, wrapped carefully in plastic, were old documents, military reports stamped confidential, black and white photographs of uniformed men standing beside civilians with their hands tied, and a list of names marked eliminated in red ink. The yellowed papers were neatly arranged by date, each bundle sealed against moisture. Her hands trembled as she lifted the photographs. They showed ordinary men and women, farmers, villagers, some bearing clear signs of abuse. In several, officers posed beside the bodies smiling, like hunters showing off trophies. A wave of nausea rose in Sarah's throat as she realized what she was seeing. Records of atrocities that had never seen the light of day. Among the reports were operational briefings, written in cold, bureaucratic language, describing the neutralization of subversive elements in the northern sector of the Araguaia region. Coordinates, names, dates, everything documented with chilling precision, as if it had been an ordinary military exercise rather than the massacre of defenseless civilians. But then she froze. One document carried a familiar name. Informant, Thomas Jenkins Sr., codename Maple. Contact with guerrilla group. Northern sector Araguaia, beneath it a photograph, her brother younger, standing among a group of poor farmers, all armed with crude hunting rifles. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Her brother hadn't been just a miner who stumbled upon buried secrets. He had been part of the resistance, an informant, perhaps even a fighter himself. Another folder contained typed testimonies, survivor accounts describing mass executions, systematic torture, and forced disappearances. Many were signed only with initials or code names, people who had risked everything to tell the truth. One of the testimonies, signed only as J, described a series of operations led by a certain Colonel D. Could it be the same Colonel Danner who had come to her door, demanding she sell the property? The sun was sinking when Sarah reburied the metal box, carefully marking the spot with a pattern of stones only she would recognize. Her mind raced. Her brother hadn't been just a miner. He had been a messenger, a link between the guerrillas and the truth, a man who had gathered evidence of crimes committed during the military regime. And now, if the colonel was searching for those documents, could they be proof of atrocities that still carried weight after all these years? The amnesty law had forgiven political offenses, yes, but crimes against humanity never expired. As she walked back through the fading light, Sarah felt the full weight of her discovery pressing on her chest. Her first duty was to her children, to keep them safe. But now she also bore her brother's legacy, the truth he had risked and possibly lost his life to protect. The twilight sky burned in shades of red and gold as she reached the house. The children were already home from Mrs. Anna's, playing in the yard, swept clean of dust and weeds. "Mom!" Peter ran to her. "Mrs. Anna gave us food, beans and flour and even a piece of dried meat." Sarah smiled, overwhelmed with gratitude for the woman's kindness. Perhaps she could trust her. Maybe even ask for advice about the land and the people nearby. She would need allies if she was to stand against the colonel, or simply survive in that hostile place. Later that night, after the children had fallen asleep, Sarah studied the remaining markings on the walls. They pointed to other excavation sites, not just on her property, but scattered across the region. Her brother had divided the evidence, perhaps to protect it, or himself. Alongside the maps were series of numbers that looked like coordinates, and cryptic references to locations, code names, and even biblical verses, likely part of a hidden key or cipher system he had devised. Thomas had been meticulous, almost obsessive, creating a system that only someone who truly knew the land and had the courage to follow every clue could ever decode. Among his writings, one sentence stood out, underlined twice: "The cave holds the heart of the secret." There were no further explanations. Just that cryptic message, both a clue and a warning. Sarah knew of no cave in the area, but every other clue had led her to something real. This one had to mean something too. That night she barely slept. Her mind raced with fear and choices. She could accept the colonel's offer, walk away and protect her children, but abandon the truth. She could keep digging, risking everything. Or she could try to deliver the evidence to the authorities, though she had no idea who she could trust. Would the government protect her? Or silence her just like before? She turned on the old radio she'd found among her brother's belongings. After some static, she caught a faint signal from a station in Hillstone, broadcasting the nightly news. Between reports on the mango harvest and the distant forecast for rain, one story caught her attention. The National Truth Commission continues to investigate new reports of missing persons in the Araguaia region. Her heart raced. It was the first time she had ever heard of such a commission, a group collecting testimonies and evidence about crimes committed during the dictatorship. A spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe there was a way to seek justice without putting her children in immediate danger. But before she could think further, a noise outside made her freeze. She quickly blew out the lamp, her eyes adjusting to the moonless dark. Peering through the crack in the window, she saw the silhouette of a man moving slowly through the yard. It wasn't the colonel or his men. This figure was thinner, cautious, almost fearful. Sarah grabbed the pickaxe beside her bed and waited near the door, ready to protect her children if she had to. Footsteps approached, then a gentle knock. Not the harsh pounding of the colonel's men, but a hesitant tap. "Mrs. Sarah," a low voice called softly. "It's Joe Little. I need to talk to you." "It's urgent," Joe whispered. Sarah exhaled in relief at the sound of the old man's voice, but still gripped the pickaxe as she opened the door. "What's wrong, Mr. Joe?" The old man stepped in quickly, glancing over his shoulder as if he feared being followed. "The colonel's back in town," he said, his voice low. "He's at the hotel right now, meeting with the sheriff and 2 other men nobody knows." He leaned closer. "I heard they're planning to search your property tomorrow, with or without your permission. They're looking for the documents your brother hid." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. She hadn't even had time to process what she'd found, let alone decide what to do with it. "How do you know that?" she asked. "My niece works in the hotel kitchen," Joe said. She overheard the conversation while serving coffee. He hesitated. "He's narrowing. They're saying they have a search warrant, but everyone knows the sheriff's been friends with the colonel for years. It won't be official." "It'll be a raid," Sarah's voice trembled. "Then what do you think I should do?" Joe studied her for a long moment, measuring her resolve. Have you found what your brother left behind? Sarah hesitated. She trusted the old man, but only so far. I found some things, she admitted softly. Documents, mostly. Joe nodded, as if confirming something he already suspected. If you want to keep those papers safe, I know someone who can help. A teacher from Recife. She's been researching the old indigenous settlements around here. She's connected to journalists, people who could make good use of what you found, without putting you or the children in danger. And how do I find her? Sarah asked. She's staying at my daughter's house in Jatoba, near the border. I can take you there, first thing in the morning before the colonel's men arrive. Sarah thought about the old man's offer. Trusting someone she barely knew might be foolish, but what choice did she have? If the colonel came with a so-called warrant, he would tear through every inch of the property until he found what he wanted. I'll have to bring my children, she said firmly. Of course, Joe replied. I'll come by with the cart at dawn. Don't bring much, just the documents and the essentials. The less baggage, the better. After the old man left, Sarah stayed awake for hours, preparing for the escape. She gathered the most important documents, the incriminating photographs, the list of eliminated names, and packed a few basic clothes. Food and water, the gold she decided to leave behind. Carrying it would be far too dangerous and far too tempting for anyone who might stop them. If you discovered that a family member had hidden evidence of crimes from a dictatorship, would you keep it secret or try to expose the truth? What would you do, knowing powerful people could threaten your family? Tell us what you think in the comments. The next morning, the sky was overcast, hinting at a rare promise of rain. Sarah woke before sunrise, her body tense, her mind alert. She had slept little, alternating between checking the road and recounting the papers she would take. She woke the children gently, speaking in a whisper. We're going on a little trip, she said softly. But what about our things, Mom? Lucy murmured, rubbing her eyes. We'll be back soon, sweetheart. Just take what matters most to you. The girl clutched her rag doll, the only remnant of happier days. Peter, ever practical, helped wrap the food they would carry. Moments later, the faint creak of wooden wheels broke the morning silence. Joe had arrived, punctual as promised. His weathered face was drawn tight with concern. We need to leave now, he whispered urgently. I saw movement on the main road. He helped Sarah lift the children onto the cart, hiding them under a worn canvas tarp to keep them out of sight. Sarah took one last look at the fragile house. That broken shell of a home, which, in such a short time, had come to feel like safety. Then she turned away. In the dim light of dawn, Sarah thought she saw the silhouette of her brother standing at the doorway, a silent guardian, blessing her departure. They climbed onto Joe's cart and set off toward Jatoba, following a narrow back trail to avoid the main road. The sky darkened with every passing minute, heavy clouds gathering above them. For people of the drylands, rain was always a good omen, Sarah thought, and she prayed this one meant safe passage for their dangerous journey. The cart creaked over rough terrain, its wheels sinking into patches of loose soil. Peter, ever restless, kept trying to peek out despite his mother's warnings to stay down. During one of those stolen glances, his voice broke the silence. Mom, look, that big rock. It looks like a cave. Sarah turned to where he pointed, her pulse quickening. Between jagged outcrops of stone, a dark opening yawned, like the mouth of the earth itself. Could it be the cave mentioned in her brother's notes? Mr. Joe, she asked, her voice trembling with excitement, do you know that cave? The old man slowed the cart, tugging gently on the reins of the thin mule that pulled them. His weathered eyes squinted against the fading light as he studied the rock formation. Know it? I know it, he said slowly. But folks say it's haunted. Nobody's gone there since your brother disappeared. A heavy silence settled over them. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of wet soil, the smell of approaching rain. Large drops began to fall, striking the dust like small dark craters. Haunted? Peter asked, eyes wide with both fear and wonder. That's what they say, Joe murmured. Voices, whispers, moans from the dark. Your brother Thomas, he went there often in the months before he vanished. Then after he was gone, men from the city came. They searched the place from end to end and left empty-handed. Since then, no one's dared to enter. A realization struck Sarah like lightning. The markings on the walls, the underlined phrase, "The cave holds the heart of the secret." It all pointed here. This wasn't superstition keeping people away. It was fear, carefully planted by the colonel and his men to guard whatever Thomas had hidden inside. "We need to go there before we leave," Sarah said firmly. Already stepping off the cart, "Mrs. Sarah, it's raining now, and the professor's waiting for us," Joe protested. "It's dangerous. More dangerous," she replied, "would be leaving the truth buried." Her voice was steady, resolute. "If the colonel and his men are at my house, it means they haven't found what they're looking for. And if they haven't found it, it's because it's here." Lucy began to cry softly, terrified by the thought of entering the dark cave. Sarah knelt and wrapped her in a tight embrace. "It's going to be all right, sweetheart. Mommy just needs to check something. Real quick." Using dry branches wrapped in cloth soaked with kerosene that Joe carried for emergencies, they fashioned crude torches. Outside, the rain now fell steadily, forming shimmering curtains of water over the cave's mouth. "The children can wait in the cart," Joe suggested. "No," Peter objected immediately. "I want to come. I can help." Sarah hesitated, torn between protecting them and keeping them close. Finally, she decided it was safer to stay together. The cave was damp and cold, a world apart from the searing heat outside. The uneven ground was littered with small stones, and patches of mud clung to their shoes. At some points, the ceiling dropped low, forcing them to crouch as they moved deeper inside. Sarah led the way, torch held high, its light trembling across the jagged walls. Peter followed close behind, eyes wide, holding Lucy's small hand. Joe brought up the rear, whispering old prayers he'd learned as a boy. As they advanced, the sound of rain faded, replaced by the steady dripping of water seeping through cracks in the stone ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and age, minerals, moss, and time itself. After winding through several narrow passages, they reached a larger chamber. The ceiling rose into a natural dome, where bats stirred restlessly, disturbed by their presence. Mineral veins shimmered along the walls, reflecting the flickering torchlight like underground stars. Sarah felt it instantly. This was it. This was the heart of the secret her brother had written about. Something about the place, the deliberate arrangement of certain stones, the symmetry of the floor, felt too precise to be natural. "Wait here," she said softly. She stepped toward a narrow side passage, the space tightening around her as she turned sideways to squeeze through. Her torch burned low above her head, illuminating the rough stone ahead. The walls scraped her back as she moved forward, her heartbeat pounding in her chest like a drum echoing through the cave. Each step she took echoed like a heartbeat. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about her brother, walking this same path alone, carrying his secrets and the unbearable weight of the truth he had uncovered. The air grew thicker, heavy with a faint metallic scent she couldn't quite identify. After about 30 feet through the narrow passage, the tunnel opened into another chamber, smaller than the first, but tall enough for her to stand upright. It didn't look natural. The walls bore clear tool marks, evidence that someone had expanded the space by hand. At the far end, behind a cluster of rocks deliberately arranged to hide what lay beyond, she found metal crates carefully lined up. They weren't abandoned, they were protected, wrapped in plastic sheets and set on makeshift wooden pallets to keep them off the damp ground. Her brother had planned everything, anticipating that these materials would need to survive for years, maybe decades, before being found. With trembling hands, Sarah lifted the tarp from the first crate. It was locked, but the same small brass key that had opened the box from the cistern fit. Perfectly, the lock gave way with a metallic click that echoed through the cavern walls. Inside lay the rest of Tom's secret treasure. Stacks of classified military documents, neatly arranged by date. Some were so old the paper had yellowed around the edges. Operational reports, maps with marked neutralization zones, lists of names annotated with words like eliminated or transferred to an undisclosed location. There were dozens of cassette tapes, each labeled by hand, sealed in plastic bags. One in particular caught her eye. Col J.D. Confession 1988. Could it be a recording of the Colonel himself? How on earth had her brother managed to get this? In a smaller, heavier crate, she found what must have been the true reason for the Colonel's obsession. Gold bars stamped with military insignias. At least 20 of them, each roughly the size of a bar of soap. Tucked beside them was an envelope filled with photographs, images of soldiers confiscating valuables from poor families, crates loaded into military trucks, and a meeting of uniformed men dividing the spoils among themselves. Tom had documented not only the atrocities, but also the corruption that followed. A tree of crimes, whose roots stretched deep into power structures that had survived since the old dictatorship. Sarah stared in disbelief. If these documents ever came to light, they wouldn't just destroy the Colonel. They could expose an entire network that had thrived in silence for decades. A noise behind her snapped her out of it. Echoes, voices calling her name through the tunnel. "Mom, are you okay?" Peter's voice trembled, full of worry. "I'm fine," she called back, clutching the torch tighter. "I'm coming back now." The light flickered as she turned toward the passage, and for the first time she realized the weight of what she was truly carrying. Not just her brother's secret, but the truth that could change everything. Quickly, Sarah selected the most crucial files, several of the tapes, including the one labeled Col J.D. Confession 1988 and 2 of the gold bars. She slipped them into an old canvas satchel she'd found folded inside one of the crates. For a moment, she hesitated, staring at the rest of the gold. It gleamed dully in the flickering torchlight, a silent temptation, but she knew it was too dangerous, too heavy, too cursed. She would take only what was necessary. As she prepared to leave, something caught her eye. An envelope pinned to the inside of a lid. Inside, a handwritten letter in her brother's unmistakable script. "To whoever finds this, if you're reading these words, I may already be listed as missing or dead." These crates contain proof of crimes committed by military officers and government officials during and after the dictatorship in the Araguaia region. Innocent people were tortured, executed, and robbed. Whole families vanished. I gathered this evidence over many years, often at great personal risk. I recorded testimonies, rescued documents meant to be burned, and photographed what others buried in silence. The gold hidden here was stolen from farmers, falsely accused of helping guerrillas, taken by corrupt officers for their own wealth. I never touched it. It's stained with innocent blood, please. Make sure this evidence reaches journalists or honest authorities. And if it's you, Sarah, my sister, know that I always believed the truth would come to light one day. With love and hope, Tom. Tears rolled down her sunburned cheeks as she folded the letter and pressed it against her heart. Her brother had known this would happen, had accepted death to protect the truth. Now, it was her turn to finish what he started. She hurried back through the narrow tunnel, the satchel clutched tightly in her arms. When she reached the main chamber, Zeke and the children saw her face, pale, determined, and understood without a word that what she carried could change everything. They rushed out into the rain. Thunder rolled across the dry hills as they emerged from the cave, the world outside now blurred by sheets of water. Then the growl of engines cut through the storm. From behind the rocks, they saw the Colonel's black truck speeding toward the property, its tires churning through the mud, through the windshield. Sarah caught a glimpse of the Colonel himself, seated beside armed men. Her heart froze. "Right on time," muttered Zeke. "We need to move, now." They ran toward the cart, feet sinking in the wet clay, rain drenching their clothes. Behind them, the thunder echoed like warning drums. And for the first time, Sarah knew she wasn't just escaping with her children. She was carrying history itself. The rain was falling harder now, a blessing in disguise, erasing their footprints and blurring the view of the road behind them. Sarah held her children close beneath the thin tarp that barely shielded them from the downpour. The satchel with the evidence clutched tightly to her chest. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, loud enough that she feared the children could hear it too. "They're going to find us, Mom," whispered Peter, his eyes wide with fear. "No, sweetheart," she murmured. "The rain is on our side." Zeke guided the cart down a narrow path, steering them away from the main road. He knew the region like the back of his weathered hand, every hidden trail, every rocky curve carved into the dry land by generations of struggle. The old mule trudged forward through the thick mud, its ribs showing beneath the soaked harness. But it pressed on with quiet determination, as if it too understood the urgency. "Zeke," Sarah asked after a tense silence, "are you sure this teacher can be trusted?" "I've known Helena for years," he replied without looking up from the road. "She studied this region since her university days. Helped a lot of folks here. She's got contacts, journalists, people who still believe in truth. If anyone can get those documents into the right hands, it's her." The trip to Jatoba took nearly 3 hours along those winding back roads, twice the normal time. By the time they arrived, the storm had softened into a steady drizzle. The dirt streets of the small town had turned to rivers of red mud, the wheels of the cart sinking deep as they moved through the narrow alleys. Zeke finally stopped in front of a modest but well-kept house on the outskirts. A woman stood waiting on the porch, as if she'd known they were coming. Helena, middle-aged, grey streaks pulled into a tight bun, sharp eyes behind plain wire-frame glasses. Her movements were brisk, confident, the kind of person who had spent her life pushing against impossible odds. "Quickly," she said, glancing toward the street. "It's not safe out here." Inside, the contrast was striking. The small house was lined with shelves overflowing with books, faded maps pinned to the walls, and photographs of archaeological sites and forgotten settlements. Sarah paused at the doorway, dripping from the rain, still clutching the satchel that carried her brother's truth. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a fragile hope. That maybe, just maybe, she had found an ally, and that her brother's voice, long buried beneath years of silence, was finally about to be heard. In one corner of the modest house stood equipment Maria recognized: old tape recorders, film reels, and slide projectors. It was clearly the workspace of a serious researcher. Helena offered them dry clothes and poured a pot of strong coffee while Maria Jose briefly explained her situation. The children were settled in a back room, utterly exhausted from the journey and all the fear that had carried them there. When the two women were finally alone, Maria Jose opened the canvas bag and carefully spread the documents across the kitchen table. Helena leaned over them, her eyes narrowing in disbelief as she adjusted her glasses again and again. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "These are solid proofs, evidence of crimes that many have tried to erase from history." "I don't want revenge," Maria said softly, "only justice for my brother, but I need to protect my children." Helena removed her glasses and rubbed her tired eyes before answering. "I understand. I have contacts within the Truth Commission and a few trusted journalists. We can arrange protection for you and the kids while these documents are reviewed. But once this starts, there's no turning back. Powerful people will do anything to keep this buried." Maria Jose looked down at the photos, at the faces of the victims, at the letters her brother had hidden with his life. The decision was already made the moment she found Tonho's letter. "The truth has to come out," she said firmly. "My brother gave his life for it. I can't do any less." 3 days later, when they returned to the property escorted by federal agents, they found the house ransacked and partially burned. The walls blackened, the roof collapsed, the marks of desperation still fresh in the ashes. The colonel, enraged at not finding what he was after, had tried to erase every trace Tonho left behind. The sight of the small house, the only place Maria Jose had begun to call home again, now reduced to ashes, made her stomach twist. The mud brick walls were blackened by smoke, the roof half collapsed. The door had been ripped from its hinges and lay shattered on the dirt floor. Inside, everything was overturned. The few pieces of furniture were smashed, the floor dug up in several spots. The mysterious markings on the walls, crudely scraped away or painted over in thick black. Lucia began to cry as she saw her little play corner destroyed. The few improvised toys she cherished, now nothing but burnt fragments. Pedro said nothing, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the wreckage with a heartbreaking maturity far beyond his years. One of the federal agents, a middle-aged man with a soldier's bearing but a kind expression, approached Maria Jose quietly. "He won't give up easily," he warned. "We've been ordered to keep you under protection, but we'll need your full testimony, everything you found." Maria Jose's voice trembled as she asked, "And my children? I don't want them in danger." "We can take you to a safe location in Recife while the investigation continues," he assured her. "Your children will be protected, and they can even attend school there while this goes on." She looked once more at the ruins of her home, at her frightened children clinging to each other, and at the worn satchel containing the documents and recordings that proved the colonel's crimes. Then she thought of all the families, the forgotten victims whose stories would vanish forever if she didn't act. "I'll do whatever it takes," Maria said firmly. "My brother gave his life for the truth. I won't let it be in vain." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Maria and the children were taken to a safe house in Recife, guarded around the clock by federal agents. She spent hours giving detailed statements, describing the hiding places, the markings on the walls, and the evidence buried within the cave. The investigative team, made up of federal agents and members of the National Truth Commission, listened intently, recording every word, taking notes and occasionally pausing to clarify some detail. The cassette tapes proved to be especially valuable. Audio specialists worked tirelessly to restore and enhance the recordings, revealing damning conversations, casual confessions of unspeakable crimes, arguments over how to divide assets seized illegally. The voice of Colonel Dantas was present in many of them, unmistakable and later confirmed by forensic voice experts. At night, exhausted from the endless questioning, Maria spent quiet hours with her children, trying to bring a sense of normalcy back into their lives. Peter and Lucy had been enrolled in a nearby school, and little by little, routine began to soothe their fears. Yet the nights were still restless, haunted by nightmares and startled awakenings at the faintest sound. In the weeks that followed, the documents Maria had uncovered triggered a political earthquake. Colonel Juvenal Dantas was indicted on multiple charges: torture, murder, and concealment of bodies. Other officers mentioned in the files were also investigated. Men who had once seen themselves as untouchable now found their names plastered. Across headlines, their reputations shattered, their legacies destroyed. The revelations dominated the national news. Maria followed everything from afar, shielded by anonymity inside the safe house. With the prosecutor's guidance, she had chosen not to reveal her face or name publicly, to protect her children and herself from retaliation. In the reports, she was referred to only as a relative of one of the victims who discovered the documents. The cave, it turned out, had contained the real treasure. Not gold, but truth. The recovered recordings captured the colonel himself, bragging about executions and describing covert operations, including the theft of gold and valuables taken from so-called subversives. And among the reports, investigators found several mentions of Tonho, her brother, and what might have been his final fate, that nosy fool who fancied himself a hero. The colonel's drunken, mocking voice rasped from one of the recovered tapes, instantly recognizable, heavy with arrogance. "He thought he could gather evidence against us. We made sure he won't be talking anymore." The recording continued, each word more horrifying than the last. He described how Ton had been captured while trying to contact a journalist, how he'd been interrogated for days before finally succumbing to the torture. The colonel laughed as he explained how the bodies were buried in a mass grave on a remote farm near the Alagoas border. Maria wept as she listened. The truth about her brother's fate finally laid bare after years of uncertainty. It was agony, but also, in some strange way, a release. The not knowing had been its own kind of torment. Now, at last, she could grieve. When federal agents moved to arrest Colonel Dantas, they discovered he had fled, his mansion abandoned in haste, valuables left behind, taking only documents and a large sum of cash. A nationwide manhunt was launched. His face appeared on screens and posters at airports, bus terminals, and border posts across the country. But his trusted driver of 20 years was captured soon after. Faced with the threat of being charged as an accomplice to multiple murders, the man broke his silence. He revealed the exact location of the graves, the very same farm mentioned in the tapes. A forensic anthropology team was dispatched immediately. Days of careful excavation revealed a mass grave containing the remains of at least 12 people. Among them, DNA tests confirmed the identity of Antonio José Ton. The match with samples provided by Maria was conclusive. For the first time in over a decade, her brother could be laid to rest. He was no longer just another disappeared, but a man with a name, a story, and a legacy carved into stone. His grave bore simple words, but to Maria, they meant everything. 4 months after the investigation began, and with several of the accused already under arrest, Maria and the children were finally able to return to the property. Federal agents helped rebuild the small house with stronger materials. A proper well was installed, providing clean, steady water. The scars of destruction slowly faded, replaced by new beginnings. Neighbors who had once kept their distance, afraid of being associated with the family's troubles, began to visit. They brought seedlings to replant the yard, shared meals, and offered helping hands. The story of Ton was no longer whispered as a tragedy, but spoken with pride. A simple man who had defied the powerful in the name of truth. 3 months later, one quiet evening, Maria sat with Peter and Lucy in their rebuilt home, the flicker of the television casting soft light on their faces. The news anchor's voice cut through the static. After months on the run, former Colonel Juvenal Dantas has been captured near the Paraguayan border. He will be extradited to Brazil to stand trial for crimes against humanity. Maria exhaled slowly, eyes glistening, not in fear this time, but in peace. The image on the screen showed Colonel Dantas, his once dark hair now completely white, his posture bent, his proud face hollowed by age. Handcuffed and flanked by federal officers, he was a shell of the arrogant man who had once stood in Maria's doorway, threatening her with quiet menace. His empire of fear had finally crumbled. "Your uncle was a brave man," Maria told the children as they watched in silence. "He believed the truth had to be known, no matter how long it took." "He was right, wasn't he, Mum?" Peter asked softly, his young face marked by a wisdom far beyond his years. "Yes, son," she whispered. "The truth always finds its way." With the recovered gold, legally surrendered to the authorities, and later partially returned to the family as compensation, Maria built a deep artesian well that supplied not only her land but also the neighboring farms. The simple yet efficient water system transformed daily life in that forgotten stretch of countryside, where every drop had once been a treasure. The remaining funds were placed into a trust to support the families of the other victims identified in the documents. Some of those families had spent decades not knowing what became of their loved ones. Now, along with the truth, they received a small measure of material recognition for their suffering. "You could have kept it all," remarked old Mrs. Zephyr, during one of her visits, handing Maria seedlings of basil and lemon balm for the garden. No one would ever know. I would, Maria replied quietly, kneeling beside her as they planted together. And I couldn't look my children in the eye knowing our future was built on someone else's pain. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Peter and Lucy attended the local school, made friends, and grew strong and healthy. Maria returned to sewing, this time with a modern machine bought with part of the compensation. She crafted dresses and shirts she sold at the town market, building a loyal clientele. The once desolate farm had become a modest but thriving home. Sturdy walls, electric light, running water, and even a small satellite dish the children had begged for so they could watch cartoons. A vegetable garden provided fresh produce. Chickens roamed freely in the yard, and laughter from neighborhood kids filled the air, chasing away the ghosts of the past. At the entrance of the property stood a handmade sign Peter had painted at school, its colors bright and the letters uneven but full of pride. Jurema Farm, in memory of Antonio José Santos, who believed justice is worth more than gold. The investigations Tun had begun kept spreading, uncovering new crimes in other states. His careful work had sparked a chain reaction that shattered decades of silence and impunity. His courage had become an inspiration, urging others to speak, to denounce, to demand justice. On certain nights, when the moon hung full over the dry hills and the wind whispered through the cactus fields, the locals swore they could feel Tun's spirit at peace. Some even claimed to see a faint light flickering near the cave. A silent guardian watching over the land, protecting secrets still waiting to be told. Maria didn't know if she believed those stories, but sometimes, when the night was especially clear and the backlands glowed silver under the moonlight, she stepped into the yard, lifted her eyes to the horizon, and whispered a quiet thank you to her brother. For leaving behind not gold, but courage, but for trusting her to finish what he had started, for teaching her children that even in the harshest soil, justice can bloom, if watered with determination. Would you do the same? Would you give up wealth for what's right, or keep the secret and the gold? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember, some truths are too precious to stay buried.